Bhubaneswar-based bird watcher and bird photographer who pioneered community bird watching in Odisha in 2012. She is the only woman from Odisha to be featured in Sanctuary Asia special edition of Women in Our Wilds. Panchami is also the granddaughter of eminent poetess Nirmala Devi. Recently, she published all the works of Nirmala Devi under the title Nirmala Devi Kabita Samagra, which is edited by writer and poet Ratnamala Swine. She is now translating Nirmala Devi's poems into English. As for Mr. Ruskin Bond, I'll have to read the whole book. So, Mr. Ruskin Bond is a Padma Bhushan, and I think more close to his heart is the fact that many of you between the ages of 55 and 10 have read this man's works. So no award can quantify that feeling. So welcome Mr. Bond and welcome Panchami. I hand it over to you now.
Hello, check.
Thank you, Malvika. What a beautiful morning listening to one master of the written word. Inspiring, full of wisdom, and I'm sure our children here have soaked it all in. Not only the children, but all the elders as well. I will have to start with thanking the organizers for this absolutely enchanting ambience. Thank you for not cloistering us into four walls, because I'm sure an open space will give open minds to our children, and they'll soak in the words much better. We now have the opportunity to listen to another master of the written word, Mr. Ruskin Bond. He needs no introduction, but I'll have to do with the formalities. At the age of 17, he wrote the iconic The Room on the Roof, which won him the John Llewellyn Rhys Memorial Prize when he was only 19 years old. His narratives, with simple articulation and relatable themes, transport you to the world of his stories. With more than 500 short stories, novellas, and poems to his credit, Padma Bhushan Ruskin Bond, also known as India's resident Wordsworth, has been writing for 6 decades now. And for me, his books have almost always been a start to finish. I probably read my first Ruskin Bond when I was only 10 or 11, and though this session focuses on his writings for children, we know that Ruskin Bond's writings transcend generations. I read and reread Ruskin Bond, and he is certainly my most favorite Indian author. I'm extremely honored and privileged to have this opportunity for a tête-à-tête with the real Bond. Sir, the first question that I have for you is probably something that you may have been asked 1,000 times, but I'm sure there are many children in the audience who would like to know, are you related to James Bond?
Never heard of him. Who is this James Bond that you're talking about?
We haven't heard of him either. Our Bond is right here.
However, I did have an uncle long ago whose name was James, but he was a dentist. He wasn't a secret agent. And when he passed away and his grave is up in the hill station of Mussoorie, I wrote an epitaph for him which went, "Stranger, approach this spot with gravity. James Bond is filling his last cavity."
Oh,
thank you.
That's beautiful.
So that was the end of him.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So now on to something more serious. Something that actually astounds many of us is your prodigious output in writing. You obviously have a packed traveling schedule because you're always invited to events and programs. Considering that you travel so much, and so how do you write so much?
Actually, I'm not a good traveler, and as I mentioned last night, I used to resist going to literary festivals for a long time. I mean, these lit fests started, I think, about 10 years back, and they've gradually become more and more fashionable and popular. But I used to stay away from them for the simple reason, as you mentioned, that I thought I wouldn't be able to get in much writing because I knew some writers who never missed a lit fest. If you went to any of them, the same writers would keep popping up, and I'm not sure when they did any writing. But along came Malvika Banerjee and Tata Steel, and they invited me to Kolkata and made such a fuss over me and gave me such a nice holiday that I decided I would come to a few lit fests in future, especially if they were organized by her. And so here I am, and I'm no stranger to Bhubaneswar. I've come occasionally. I have a connection with the KIT International School and help them to bring out a magazine for children. And even if I wasn't, I'd still be coming here because I do like Orissa. I like the very friendly and helpful people here, and your beautiful landscape and the East Coast, your East Coast running down. It's the most spectacular in the country. So you'll be afraid. I'm afraid you'll be seeing a lot of me in the months and hopefully years to come. But because I won't be staying away.
I'm sure everyone's delighted to know that, sir. And I'd like to ask you, would you say solitude enables the writing process in the sense that do you take off, I mean, when you just have some thoughts and ideas, do you just take off and try to be alone? Because, you know, your autobiography is titled Lone Fox Dancing. So how important is solitude to enable the writing process?
I find that it is all important, solitude to a writer, not simply in order to be alone and to work, but to be with yourself. You know, you could just go off somewhere where you won't have too much human contact, and in a way you're meditating or contemplating the universe and getting ideas. So the actual business of writing or sitting down and writing your story or book can actually be done anywhere or anytime. And a true writer should be able to write under any condition, you know, whether it's in a railway train or at an airport or out here in a garden. Best place is under a tree, I think. And so the place where you write isn't so important, but solitude certainly is. And solitude is something that you look for yourself. It's not like loneliness. Now, loneliness is something that's thrust upon you. And you won't enjoy being lonely. Loneliness is a rather sad thing. It means you don't have any friends. But solitude is something you look for. You even want to change from your friends for a little while. And that's the time when you perhaps get inspiration or ideas for writing. Solitude, go close to nature as much as possible.
Do you work on just one story at a time? We've heard that there are many authors who start 2 or 3 stories and then take forward one, which is, you know, they get the inspirations or the muse hits them. So do you work on just one story, or do you also have this process of 2 or 3 stories at one time?
I find it easier to work on one story at a time. I've tried sometimes, maybe trying 2 or 3 projects concurrently, a story or something non-fiction or biography, but then I get confused and sometimes and make mistakes. So I think it's better to do one at a time.
Do one story at a time. Do you write something every day as a discipline?
I do try to write something every day. In fact, I've made it a habit over the years, first thing in the morning, to note down any interesting dream that I might have had. Dreams are so important, I think, for a writer. And a dream can sometimes become a story. Well, it is a story to begin with, but a rather mixed up, fantastic one. And then if you start analyzing your own dreams too, you might learn something about yourself and about others. So, like Dr. Freud, I take down my dreams, but I'm not a psychoanalyst, so I would use them in a more simplification way. Also, it's an exercise. When I write it down, it's like writing a little story. And then I'll go on to other writing, maybe, even to routine work. But early morning, I find, is the best. And I know amongst all of you, there are many potential writers, young ones, and many who have already been published. And you will all have your own ways of writing and your own favorite time for writing. It could be in the middle of the night sometimes. If I get an idea and wake up suddenly, I might note it down because it's possible I'd have forgotten it by morning.
That's wonderful. I think we'll have to catch our dreams that way. You were born in Kasauli, you studied in Darjeeling, but you chose to have your home in a quaint little place in the hills called Lander.
Yes. Yes, Kasauli is a very small hill station on the way to Simla. And actually it was Simla I went to school.
Right.
And Mussoorie is another hill station where I've lived for the better part of 50 years now. And Landau is a part of Mussoorie. It's the cantonment area. And I've received many visitors, but now so many that it's hard to see everyone. So I go to the local bookshop on a weekend, on Saturdays, and meet readers and talk to them, and if necessary, sign their books. So the next time any of you are up there, please let me know, and I'll be happy to meet you.
I just want to ask you, how much of an inspiration or facilitator has Lander been for your writings? Because you have a book on Lander, which is Lander Days, and then, of course, a lot of references. So how much has the place influenced you?
Well, if you live long in a place, naturally you'll want to write about it. And I'm one of those writers who works best when he's writing about people that he's known, a place that he's familiar with. Just to say, R.K. Narayan created Malgudi, which was really perhaps Mysore, and other writers have dwelt on the areas that they've lived in. You know, Jane Austen never left her village in England. So it helps you to write because the place is familiar to you. You might be a different kind of writer, a more inventive one, and want to write fantasy or space fiction or something, which is great. But for me, it's the closer I am to home, perhaps the better I write. So Landau has been home for so many years, so naturally it's there in my books. But it's not just the city or the town, really. It's the region as a whole. So, and for me, my inspiration is nature. You know, so the mountains, the trees, the streams, the rivers, the plants, all these play a part in my life and in my writing.
Right, sir. So, which actually was my next question to you, that your stories have humor, fantasy, adventure, but then what attracts me the most as a reader is your beautiful descriptions of nature. So, you've grown in the hills, you've been surrounded by nature from your childhood. How important has nature been? You just said that it has influenced you, but we would like to know a little more about the birds, the butterflies, the trees.
Yes, we all take nature for granted, but we are part of the natural world, and we think sometimes that we control it, but we don't. Just when we think we have got the better of nature and built a few dams and other projects and gone to the moon, etc., along comes a tidal wave or an earthquake, and suddenly human beings are pretty helpless. So I think we should look after our natural surroundings a little more than we have, because after all, as far as we know, this is the only planet that has so much by way of natural beauty on it, forests and rivers and and which has made life possible for us. We have yet to discover a planet that is anything equal to it. So I think we need to care for it a little better. It is our home.
Would you say that reflection on past events, nostalgia, stimulates the writing process in a certain way?
Yes, I am a nostalgic writer. I write a lot about the past because, and childhood has played a great part in my writing. Originally, I wrote a lot about my own childhood. Then I started writing about other children. And then from being a writer for adults and writing adult fiction, I took to writing children's fiction. Actually, I was writing books from the age of 17, but I didn't really write a serious children's book till I was about 40. And then I found it was a delight to be writing for young readers too. So I'm very lucky. I've got young readers, old readers, middle-aged readers, and so as you say, sometimes I wonder what to write next.
Yeah. Does one need to be a good observer to be a good writer?
Yes, a reasonably good observer. Unless you're very imaginative, then perhaps you'll be daydreaming and not observing at all. And then you could write Alice in Wonderland or a fantasy. But I think for a realistic writer, it is important to be a good observer. And to those young people who like to write, I would suggest that you keep a notebook, a diary. I keep a sort of journal. And I'm not very regular with it, but I jot down thoughts, observations, anything interesting I've seen or heard. You don't use all of it, but some of it will come into use in your work. So I think for someone like me who is perhaps, you could say, an addictive writer, for whom writing is almost an addiction, it would be a regular thing, something I did every day.
Do writers necessarily need to be avid readers too, or does reading too much affect the originality of a writer?
No, I think the more you read, the better, because you get an insight into the workings of other writers, into their minds, into the way they write. So for a writer, I think it's all important that you should be a reader too. And certainly when I was a schoolboy, I was a great bookworm. And I read everything that came my way. I ended up being in charge of the school library, which meant I had the keys of the library, and then it slowly became my private domain. So when I wanted to escape homework or PT, horrible that early morning PT, I used to run away and go to the library and hide. And so over there I would read everything that was there, from the classics to detective stories, and I think that's why I wanted to be a writer, to emulate my own favorites. Not to write like them, but to be one of them. So reading, I think, is all important, but read what you enjoy, and don't force yourself to read heavy tomes that are boring. Everyone will find something to interest him or her.
How much are your characters influenced by real life people? Rusty, as we all know, is autobiographical. So
Yes, real life. I think with most authors, you'll find that their characters, even if they don't admit it, would well be based on people they've known. And so my friends, lovers, people I've known at different periods of my life, they come into my stories. And sometimes I make up people. If I want to write a funny story, I might invent uncles or aunts or distant relatives. I don't know why, but when I want to write a funny story, it's usually about a distant relative who live far away and can't get at me. So, and then if I run out of relatives, I write about animals, because animals also can make interesting stories. And if I run out of animals, I write ghost stories. You can always cook up a ghost story or two. And in old hill stations, you find a few of them floating around anyway, and inhabiting old houses. So that's my safety valve, the ghost story.
Ghosts are such important characters in your story. So, would you say that reading ghost stories enlivens the imagination of children?
Well, children usually enjoy reading ghost stories because they like getting scared, but they know at the back of their minds that, oh, it's not real, it's not really happening, so nothing to be scared about. But you enjoy the emotion anyway. But maybe they stimulate the imagination, yes. A ghost story is a way, like a dream. In fact, it's some of those dreams that I mentioned that became ghost stories. So there's nothing to be afraid of. In fact, a little girl came up to me not long ago and said, "Sir, I like your ghost stories, but they're not frightening enough," she says. "Can't you make them more scary?" So I said, well, I'll try. But she had obviously been watching television films, and there's no shortage of horror and blood and gore and scary things happening on television screens. So my ghosts are, by comparison, friendly ones and even helpful at times. Thank you. Thank you.
A very important question as a parent, which I would like to ask you. I mean, you write for children, you are with children a lot of times. Do you think our children now lead a very cloistered existence? Gadgetry has invaded our lives like never before. Are books and outdoor spaces less of companions now for children?
You're right in a way, because I know so many youngsters who are perhaps, instead of being up all night with a book, as I used to be, they'll be up all night with their laptop, or their phone. And so I guess that's another form of entertainment or even addiction, because reading is also an addiction. But I think books cannot really be replaced as not just as entertainment, but as something, as companions and as things that can give you something back in life, and help you on the way. You must sort of find the kind of writer that suits you, and then read that writer.
Who or what would you say is your biggest inspiration?
My biggest inspiration, the sky above, I think, and these trees, these mango trees. Yeah, they are just about to come into blossom. And up in Dehradun, where I live, they will come into blossom in March. And then the air is full of the scent or fragrance of mango blossom. And it's springtime. And it's springtime, and in Mathura and Vrindavan, Krishna will be cavorting with the gopis under the mango trees.
Beautiful. A question on something that is no longer just a theory, but is staring us hard at the face: climate change. Sir, what would you like to tell our children about climate change?
Well, 1945, when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was living in Dehradun, where it had never snowed for 50 years, and late one evening it began snowing. Now, this was a freak occurrence then. And my mother was inside in bed because she just had my baby brother had been born. So I ran inside and I said, Mom, it's snowing outside. And she said, I'm not in the mood for your silly jokes, Ruskin. So I went outside and I took a branch off the lychee tree, which was covered with snow, and I came in and showed it to her, and then she believed me. And next morning there was snow on the ground, and we were all playing with snowballs. So this was something that hadn't happened for about 40 or 50 years and hasn't happened since. And, but those were years that right through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, when the hills, the surrounding hills in Missouri, where I live now, every winter had a snowfall. And now, this winter, there hasn't been any. Last winter, there wasn't any. And yet in other parts of the world where you don't expect it to be snowing, you're getting severe, extreme winters. So this pattern of extreme climate changes is more and more apparent, and it's obviously leading to storms and unnatural weather. And from what the scientists and the experts tell us, it's due to our lifestyles. And there are various reasons for it. So there's a great debate going on everywhere as to what we're going to do about it. So all I would say that look after our environment as best you can. Don't cut down the forests. Don't let the towns and cities spread beyond a reasonable limit, and keep down the traffic and everything that causes pollution. Because when I look down now, even from the mountaintop where I live, and in the mornings I see the valley is covered with fog, or smog as they call it, and that wasn't there before. So I think not just, and it's not just in India, it's all over the world. As well as you go to any town or city and you will find litter all over the place and rubbish dumps which haven't been cleared. This is more apparent in the north than it is here, certainly. So I think there is a great deal that can be done and should be done on the planet.
The last question, sir. What is your advice to budding writers? Many of them in the audience, many more not here, but I'm sure they'd like to know from you.
My advice to budding writers is, well, make sure you can write. I mean, don't just write because you want your name on the cover of a book or an article. Have a love for words. Respect your language, the language you're going to write in, whether it's English or Oriya or Hindi or any other Indian or other language. So master the language, because I think we must respect the language we write in and write beautiful sentences, use words to good effect, and not be careless in our writing. And secondly, you will have disappointments if you want to be a writer. So you must be prepared for occasional disappointments. And in spite of them, if you are determined and if you work hard and carry on writing, you will succeed. You will achieve what you set out to achieve.
Thank you, sir. I think we'll now open the house to questions from children. I'm sure there is bubbling over with questions.
Where's one at the back?
More children this time.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Digdarshak Das.
There's. Why don't you just come in front?
Where is he?
So my question is, sir, from where did you get inspiration from writing, and what's your favorite book of yours, and who's your favorite writer?
Favorite writer, there's so many favorite writers, it's hard to focus on one. And because, as I said, I grew up on books, and that's why I wanted to be a writer. And so I think it's the writers that we read when we are boys and at school, but when we're girls too, and those are the ones that influence us. So I go back to the classics, to Dickens, to Emily Bronte to Rabindranath Tagore to so many of that period, and writers like more modern ones like Somerset Maugham and Graham Greene. Well, the list could go on and on endlessly. Yeah? So it is books and writers, other writers that will help you.
Your favorite book amongst your books?
Oh, my favorite book amongst my books. Again, I'm not sure that I have a favorite. Maybe the first one, very often our firstborn is our favorite child. So The Room on the Roof, which I wrote when I was 17, 18, I think it's a book about adolescence, and it was written by an adolescent, which is what I was at the time. So I think, in a way, that makes it different and unique.
Next question, please.
Good afternoon, sir. Myself, Kashish Raghuvanshi. And my question is, sir, how can we write a good story?
Well, try telling a good story. And if you are good at telling stories, then try and put them into words and see if you can write a good story. So it is a gift, writing and telling stories. It is a gift. So sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you may not be able to achieve it. So you can learn to write in the sense that you can improve your writing, your use of language and the way you tell stories. But essentially, writers are born. They are born. And if they are made too, after taking a lot of coaching and lessons, it will be because it was there in any case, the instinct to write.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon to you, sir. I am a student studying in Delhi, and I have been a big fan of yours since I was a child. So, sir, I am sure you must have faced your ups and downs in the field of literature, and what made you kept going despite the ups and downs?
That's a very good question. What made me keep going all these years, in spite of many ups and downs? That's because I have actually been writing now for over 60 years. My maths isn't very good. My first book was published in 1955, 56. So how many years is that? I don't know. Yes, and those early years were difficult because, especially in India, publishing was just coming of age. There were publishers who brought out school books and textbooks, but we didn't have publishers doing much in the way of literature or fiction, general books. And to make a living as a writer, you had really to write for magazines and newspapers, which is what I did for a long time. Wrote hundreds of short stories, which are now coming out in book form, but in those days they could only be published in magazines. But it was a question of perseverance. And even when my first books were published, like many ambitious young writer, you go around to the bookshops and see if your book is there on display or not. And going back 1960s, 70s, I had a small book of stories published. And I kept going to bookshops, I couldn't find it anywhere. Then finally in a small bookshop, I found it right under a pile of other people's bestsellers, Harold Robbins and Kushwant Singh and writers of that time. So I looked around, was the shopkeeper looking or not? He seemed occupied elsewhere. So I took my book out from under the pile and put it on top. so that some people could see it. But the owner of the bookshop had spotted me, and he didn't know that I was the author. But anyway, he came along, he picked up the book, he looked at it, and he said, "Ye nahi chalta. Nobody's buying this book." Huh? And he put it back under the pile. So to teach him a lesson, I bought it myself. So sometimes poor authors have to end up buying their own books.
Next question, please.
Sir, I am Arnit of Sai International School, and my question is that in this modern world, students take up education as a priority. But how can a student get convinced to take up writing? And if it is so, do he or she have to master in it?
Um, taking up writing is a risk. It is a risk. Even today, although the publishing industry is doing reasonably well, and there are writers who are very successful in making a lot of money too. Not everyone, but a few. But even then, it's risky, because you might spend a lot of time writing a book or several books and then find you're not making enough money out of it, and then you have to look around for some other means of income. So I took that risk and got away with it. But I always, because I didn't study very far. After school, I just dropped out of college. But I always advise young people, finish your education, take up a career, and other than writing, and then do your writing. And if you succeed and if you become a successful and popular writer, then abandon the career that doesn't interest you very much, but which you have to follow. And that has been done in the past by successful writers. So otherwise, if you want to take a risk, and then you have to be very brave to do so, because you will find obstacles in the way.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Sayak from Mother's Public School. So these days, we hear a lot of debates deciding the perimeters of freedom of speech and expression, whether it be the brouhaha surrounding the film Padmavati or the ban on the book Satanic Verses. So, sir, my question to you is, as a writer, where do you think fellow writers or filmmakers, for that matter, where should they draw the line, or should you think freedom of speech should be absolute? And have you ever been personally a victim to such outrages?
No, I don't think freedom of speech should be absolute. I think we have to, in a way, censor ourselves and know the limit to which we can go or should go. And when we look at other countries across the world, I think we should consider ourselves lucky in many ways, that we do have in the way of freedom of speech, that you can ask me any question you want. And I don't know, sometimes I think, would I like to live in China? No, I don't think so. Would I like to live in the Philippines? No, I don't think so. Would I like to live in Vietnam? No, I don't think so. Would I like to live in Myanmar? No. Bangladesh? No. Or go west, would I like to live in Syria, Lebanon, Libya, all these countries which are having so much trouble? Definitely not. So I don't think there's a better place to live in than India. So so now and then there are problems, of course there are, and it's good that we have the freedoms that we have, and if we can have even more freedoms, better still, but let's not complain.
Sir, 1 minute. Sir.
Yeah, sir, where are you?
Sir, myself, Ashish Senapati from Kendapada. Sir, 2 days back, actually, I read your autobiography. So, actually, who was your first love? Susila or that Vietnamese girl who met you in London, actually?
See, this is called freedom of speech. Huh? He wants to know which girl I liked better. I have to confess it was Sushila, yeah.
That's enough.
Sir, who is Rusty, Somi and Azhar?
Yeah, they were my boyhood friends. Yes, Rusty is me as a boy, and Somi was a boyhood friend. He's still around. He went and settled in America and became an engineer. And last year only, he came out to India and he came out to Missouri to see me. Of course, when I knew him as a boy of 12 years old, now he's uh, two or 3 years younger than me, 78, 79, with a long white beard. But we're still friends. So friendship is a wonderful thing, and it doesn't always last, but if it does, then there's nothing better.
Hello, sir.
Where are you?
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Yep.
I want to know a good childhood regulates the whole life of a man.
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Yeah?
I want to know a good childhood regulates the whole life of a man. Is it true or not?
A good
Childhood.
A good childhood, of course, childhood is so important, and I think parents should bring their children up in such a way that they will always remember their childhood as being a happy one. But sometimes a difficult childhood or even a traumatic or tragic childhood can, as far as a writer goes, help him or her to write something significant. A writer like Dickens had a very difficult childhood. In fact, his father went to a debtor's prison, and he, at the age of 9 or 10, was polishing shoes on the street. But in spite of that, he used that even, in fact, in his books, those early experiences. If you look at the childhood of many writers, you'll find they did have difficult, traumatic childhoods, which in effect they put to good use later on. Still, I wouldn't wish a troubled childhood on anyone. I think childhood should be happy and innocent and full of the open of space and adventures outside. I think the more we get away maybe from our TV sets and laptops and all, and go out into the open and enjoy the open spaces of mountains, beaches, and it will lead to result in a much happier childhood.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Risha Jana from Mothers Public School. So my question to you is, you have so many writings. Did any of your writings teach you something?
Did any of my writings teach me something? Yes, they did. They taught me to be careful. Because once, long ago, maybe it was somewhere it was 76, during the emergency. And I did write a story which was published in a magazine in Bombay. And it was called The Sensualist. And some people objected to it because they said it was obscene. And a warrant came for my arrest, and I had to appear in court in Bombay. And there was a trial which lasted 2 years, and I could have gone to jail on that charge. But finally, when the trial was over and the judge said he'd enjoyed the story too, and I got an honorable acquittal. Nevertheless, for 2 years it was a very worrying and difficult time because it costs money if you're going to get hauled into court.
Sir,
So you learn from it.
Sir, and who was the first person who recognized the writer in you?
The first person to recognize the writer in me, a very interesting question. I'm trying to think hard now. Probably, you see, when I was in school, class 8, 9, I used to keep a journal, and I used to write funny things about my teachers in it. And one day my class teacher found the exercise book and read it and called me to his office. And I was, in those days, you got a beating, so I got punished, and he tore up my exercise book. So that was the end of my first story. And I got into trouble for it. So he was the person who first discovered me as a writer.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, sir. My name is Ankshita Das, and I'm quite a bit of a fan of your work. This is about a story you wrote. Its name is The Face in the Dark. I really love that story, but the ending is quite intriguing. So why did you end it right there at the point of great success, like suspense?
What was the end? He sees
The wind blew the lamp out and
the second face.
Yes.
Well, you know, it did have another line. So the year's censorship for you. One of my editors who removed that last line, and I'll tell you what the line was. It said, and that was when Miss Tolliver, the school teacher, had his heart attack.
Oh my God.
Now had his heart attack.
Yeah.
So the editors thought, since this story was going into school books, they didn't want teachers to be having heart attacks. So they cut it out.
Okay. And
there you are. Sometimes even we become censored without knowing it.
And I would really like if you just give me a little bit tips for writing like stories in our exams, and I'm sure my friends will love it too. So a little bit here and there.
You don't need tips. Just sit down and write. That's all right. All you need is a pencil and paper or pen and paper. Or if you want to do it on your laptop or anything else, fine.
Thank you so much.
you.
It's my honor to have asked you this question.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir. This is Gyanendra Bharadwaj. And sir, my question is, do you believe in dreams when dreams come true? Because what I feel that, sir, in my life, dreams really come true. Because once I dream that I will meet Ruskin Bond someday. This is really a fact, sir.
Well, at least it wasn't a nightmare. Thank you. Anyway, I'm glad. Thank you.
This was a whole story in the
Thank
dreams.
you. Well, dreams sometimes, yes, do sort of, in a way, foretell the future. And that's they never come true in exactly the way you want them to. But I sometimes I'm happy that my dreams don't come to a conclusion. I used to get one which was always troubled me, because I would have this dream in which I'm living in a very expensive 5-star hotel in Bombay. Someone's invited me there, some publisher, and but the publisher hasn't turned up. And it's every day, the days are passing, and I'm eating and drinking and enjoying the facilities of this hotel. And then I'm starting to get worried, but who's going to pay the bill? Because I certainly didn't have any money. So I think it's, and fortunately I wake up just before the bill is presented. So I don't want that dream to end, you know. So I guess it's a dream indicative of insecurity. So dreams probably do have a meaning in that way.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bond.
Thank you. Yes.
Because literature and politics are correlated. In our state, Mr. Naveen Patnaik, the Chief Minister of the state, he is also a good writer. Mr. Naveen Patnaik and Mr. Janivalla Patnaik is also a good writer. In our country also, Narendra Modi is a writer and he is a Prime Minister of India. And before that, our Vajpayee is also Prime Minister and a good writer and poet. Mr. Barack Obama is a writer and President of America. You have any desire to enter in politics and to become a country head or that? Secondly, which one is your favorite book? Mostly you are satisfied by writing that book.
All those famous leaders and politicians, as you correctly say, were very fine writers. I remember I used to read Dr. Radhakrishnan's books once. And they were politicians first and writers second, I should say. Except for Rabindranath Tagore, but he wasn't a politician. And are you suggesting now I should be a politician? No, because all those politicians were right. I don't think I would be a very successful one. And I feel that maybe a few of us should perhaps at least abstain from being political writers and be able to write about other things, you know, which are also important in life. Like Sushila and love stories and beautiful trees and nature, because in the long run, we all leave this planet Earth, so why not take some beautiful memories with us? Any more?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Akanksha Mishra from Devi Chandrashekarpur, and my question is that is comics have a bad influence on English?
Comics, are they a bad influence on English? It depends on the comic, I guess. As a boy, we used to get story comics, which weren't just cartoon strips, but which were written stories, which we illustrated, something like what we call graphic novels now. They don't necessarily spoil your English, but they can. I mean, I used to enjoy Popeye comics, but after some time I found my spelling was going because he couldn't spell at all. So it depends again on the comic.
There's a young boy who's been waiting for a long time. Please hand the mic over to him. Yeah, here. Please.
In the most of your creations, we feel that you are a direct character in that plot. Do you really write those from your own experience, or you are arranging those and relating to the plot yourself?
No, that's also a very interesting question. Yes, I've often make myself the character in the stories because I like writing in the first person. I find it easier. And so I get involved in the story or the plot, and it might not be true story. It could be fiction. But it varies a good deal. Some of the stories might be based on actual incidents or events and on real people, like my friends Somi and Ranbir in The Room on the Roof. They were real boys. But at other times, I might want to develop a story or take it further and bring in other characters, change things around. So it's a mixture of the two, Sometimes it's fact, sometimes it's fiction. You could call it faction, I think. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Adesha, and I'm a budding writer. And I actually think that whenever you're starting to write a book, you must first of all understand your audience, and you must make your writing relatable to them. And because I'm a person who is not very inclined towards fiction, I like non-fiction, and generally teens and adolescents, they aren't much interested in it because they expect it to be boring. So how to make your writing relatable to others? Your tips on that?
No, you see, you're thinking of your audience first. And you're thinking of what you should be writing for them or to entertain them.
Yes.
But don't do that. A true writer is writing for himself first.
Okay.
You must write what pleases you and what you enjoy writing. Don't just think of the audience. That's all right if you're writing a film script or maybe a romance or something where you're thinking only in terms of making money out of the book. But if you want to write literature, something worthwhile, then write for yourself. Write what pleases you, and then it might please a few other people too, because it will come out naturally. So you must aim for being natural in your writing.
Thank you, sir.
And don't just think of the audience. Thank you.
Sir, can you tell us about your childhood and how it has influenced your writing?
Well, you would have to read about my childhood because it would take a long time to talk about all of it. But let me think. Somebody asked me if I was. What was the most wicked thing I did as a boy? And was I really a good boy or a bad boy? The most wicked thing, I had an uncle, Uncle Ken, and he was very greedy and used to bully me, and he would always want me to make him omelets of, fried fish for him and do various things. And one day he asked me, Ruskin, go and make an omelet for me. So I did. But I'd got, the gardener's son had, instead of bringing me a hen's egg, on my request, he brought me a crow's egg. So I made an omelette out of a crow's egg and gave it to Uncle. He got sick afterwards. And he didn't ask me to make an omelette again, anyway.
Good
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Yashika. My question is that is traveling important for writing stories?
It can be, yeah, because again you get two kinds of writers. There have been famous writers like Somerset Maugham who traveled a great deal and whose novels are set in different countries, ranging from the South Pacific to China and Japan. And there have been other writers too who traveled a lot, Hemingway and others. On the other hand, there have been writers like Thomas Hardy, Jane Austen, others who never left their village, but who would write about their life in their own village and in their immediate vicinity. So it doesn't matter. You can be a good travel writer or a good writer who has traveled, but if you like staying at home and contemplating your navel, that too is possible. So there are all kinds of writers. In fact, no two writers are the same, nor should they be the same.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, dear.
Last two questions, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm from KIT International School. So my question is, what do you think is the key feature that increases the creativity of a story?
The key feature that?
Increases the creativity of a story.
Well, it's the writer's own creativity, or originality. Now, so you'll get some writers who are, you get some writers who are subjective writers, who write out of their own lives, out of their own personal experiences. On the other hand, you'll get objective writers who are not so personal, but they're inventive and they can maybe good at writing science fiction or adventure. So the more creative ones are usually those who write out of their own experience and lives.
So you're the subjective writer. You're a subjective writer, right? Oh.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Last question.
Sir, I'm sure you have had a very rich life. You have had many experiences. You have always had plenty of material to write from, as is evident from your stories. But sometimes all of us, I think most of us have experienced writer's block. How do you overcome that? I mean, life is filled with experiences, but sometimes when you just can't think of what to write, what do you do?
I was waiting for that question. Whenever I've been to a meeting like this or a literary festival, sooner or later, somebody asks me that question. What do you do when you get writer's block? And I guess writer's block starts at school when we are stuck in the middle of an essay or answering a question. So the solution is the same when you're an adult or writing a book or a story, is write it first in your head. Before you sit down to write a story or an essay or an article, or visualize it, see it happening, and have a beginning, a middle, and end, know how it's going to end, know what your characters are like, and then start putting it down in words. So don't just start off writing, because then without planning it beforehand. So you must plan a story or a book before you start writing it. Then you won't get stuck, then you won't get writer's block. But even if you do, there are other things you can do. Put it aside if you're stuck, and come back to it later. Put it aside, write something else. If you're fed up writing your novel, put it aside, write a short story, write a poem, write anything else. And you come back to it later when you're fresh, and you get new ideas. And the third solution, there's a waste paper basket close to you, dump it.
Thank you, sir.
We're out of time. Thank you, children, for your lovely questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all
for a
very good
enriching
question.
session,
Thank
lively
you.
session. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Yes, usually I have to try and make some funny jokes or remarks to keep the audience interested here, but because your questions were so good, it became a serious discussion. Thank you.